1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I counted each person sitting around Mother Regina's mahogany dining table with a deliberate point of my finger. My mother, my brother Marcus, his wife Bianca, two men in wrinkled suits I'd never laid eyes on before. You brought quite the crowd to strong-arm me, Mother, I said, keeping my voice level, even though fury was burning through my veins like wildfire. You thought an ambush would work. You thought you could bully me into signing away everything I've worked for just because I'm a woman. But here's the thing. I smiled, and it wasn't warm. I only brought one person too, but he's the only one who matters in this room. My name is Maya Chen Brooks. I'm 29 years old, and I hunt down liars for a living. As a certified fraud investigator at one of Houston's top financial firms, I spend my days unraveling embezzlement schemes and exposing corporate criminals. I thought I'd seen every dirty trick in the book, until the day my own flesh and blood tried to pull the ultimate con on me. It all started on a Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in my downtown Houston office on the 23rd floor, deep in an audit of a pharmaceutical company's books, when my phone started buzzing against my glass desk. The name that flashed across the screen made my stomach drop. Marcus, my older brother. The text message was brief and absolutely terrifying. Get to the house now. Mom collapsed. Doctors say it's bad. Hurry. My heart slammed against my ribcage. The spreadsheet on my monitor blurred into meaningless numbers. Despite all the years of passive-aggressive comments and constant demands for money, Regina was still my mother. The guilt hit me like a freight train. I'd been so consumed with work lately. Had I missed warning signs? Was she seriously ill? And I'd been too focused on my career to notice? I grabbed my purse and bolted from my office, leaving my laptop open and my coffee still steaming. I didn't even tell my assistant where I was going. I just ran. The drive from downtown Houston to Memorial Park usually takes 45 minutes in afternoon traffic, but I made it in 25. My knuckles turned white, gripping the steering wheel of my BMW. I kept replaying the last time I'd seen her. It was Mother's Day. She'd looked fine then, maybe a little tired. But she'd had plenty of energy to criticize my natural hair and ask why I wasn't married yet. At almost 30, I prayed it wasn't a stroke. I prayed I wasn't too late. I made those desperate bargains with God we all make when we're terrified. Just let her be, okay? And I'll visit more often. I'll be more patient with Marcus. I'll try harder to be the daughter she wants. I turned onto the tree-lined street I grew up on. The lawns were perfectly manicured, and the houses stood as symbols of Black excellence in one of Houston's most prestigious neighborhoods. But as I pulled into my mother's circular driveway, something felt wrong. There was no ambulance, no flashing lights, no paramedics rushing in and out, just Marcus's leased Escalade and a black sedan I didn't recognize parked by the curb. Maybe the ambulance already left, I thought. Maybe they took her to the hospital and Marcus stayed behind to wait for me. I parked haphazardly behind the sedan and sprinted to the front door. My keys fumbled in the lock. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I burst through the entrance, prepared for the absolute worst. Mom, I shouted, throwing my bag on the floor. Marcus, where are you? Silence greeted me. The house was perfectly still. The smell of vanilla candles and fresh flowers filled the air just like always. I ran toward the formal dining room, expecting to see signs of a medical emergency. Maybe an overturned chair or spilled medication. Instead, I stopped dead in the doorway. Mother Regina was sitting at the head of the dining table. She wasn't in a hospital gown. She was wearing her church best, a cream-colored St. John suit with her signature pearls. She looked the picture of health. She was calmly sipping tea from her fine china. To her right sat Marcus, leaning back in his chair, with a smug grin plastered across his face. He was wearing a Versace belt that I knew for a fact was counterfeit. Next to him was Bianca, my sister-in-law, looking at me with that familiar expression of fake pity and real disdain she'd perfected over the years. Across from them sat two middle-aged men in cheap gray suits, with briefcases on the table. There was no doctor. There was no emergency. Maya, you're finally here, Mother Regina said calmly, setting her teacup down with a delicate clink. Have a seat, sweetheart. We need to discuss the terms of your grandfather Solomon's estate. We've been waiting for you. The adrenaline coursing through my veins transformed into cold, hard rage. I looked from my mother's perfectly healthy face to Marcus's arrogant smirk. They had weaponized my love and my fear just to get me into a room. I straightened my spine and took a step forward. This wasn't a medical emergency. This was an ambush. The silence in that dining room was suffocating. My eyes darted around, searching for oxygen tanks or medical equipment, or even a glass of water for a sick woman. There was nothing. The only things on the polished table were thick manila folders and Mother Regina's favorite tea service. The Wedgwood china she only used when the pastor came to dinner. She took another slow, deliberate sip of her tea. Her hand didn't shake. Her skin was glowing. In fact, she looked better than she had in years. She set the cup down with a soft clink and smoothed the lapel of her designer suit. Maya, close your mouth before you catch FLIs, she said. Her voice was strong and commanding. There was no tremor of illness in it whatsoever. You said you collapsed, I whispered. My voice felt stuck somewhere between my lungs and my throat. I turned my gaze to Marcus. You texted me that the doctors said it was bad. Marcus leaned back in his chair and casually picked at his teeth. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny and a belt with a buckle so large it had to be fake. He shrugged with a casual arrogance that made my blood boil. We had to get you here somehow, sis, he said. You never answer my calls when I need capital for my ventures. Mom said this was the only way to get the whole family together to settle things properly. Bianca giggled. It was a high, grating sound that scraped against my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. She reached over and patted Marcus's hand, displaying her engagement ring that I knew was bought on credit. She was wearing a dress that was trying too hard to look modest and expensive, but came off as cheap and flashy. Don't be so dramatic, Maya, she said with a smirk. We're all family here. We just want what's best for everyone. You should be grateful we care enough to stage this intervention. I took a step back. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and walk straight out that door. I reached for the entrance handle. That's when the two men in ill-fitting gray suits moved. They had been standing in the shadows of the living room like statues. As I stepped back, they stepped forward, blocking the archway. They were big men. They didn't look like family attorneys. They looked like the kind of lawyers you hire when you want to intimidate someone into submission. Please have a seat, miss. Chen Brooks, the taller one said. His voice sounded like gravel grinding against asphalt. I'm Mr. Vance. We represent the estate interests of your brother Marcus and your mother Regina. We have a substantial amount of paperwork to get through today, and it will go much faster if you cooperate. The trap snapped shut. I could hear it in my head as loud as a gunshot. This was never about my mother's health. This was about grandfather Solomon. He had passed away 3 months ago, and the reading of the will had been mysteriously delayed. Now I knew why. They had been planning this ambush. I looked at Mother Regina. She refused to meet my eyes. She just stared at the teapot as if reading her future in the porcelain pattern. So this is it? I said, letting my purse slide from my shoulder to the floor. You faked a medical emergency to ambush me over money? It's not just money, Marcus said, slamming his hand on the table. His eyes were wide with naked greed. It's my birthright, Maya. I'm the man of this house now. Grandfather was old and confused at the end. We're just correcting his mistakes. I looked at the lawyers blocking my exit. I looked at the smug faces of my brother and his wife. I looked at my mother, who had taught me to pray, but was now preying on me. My investigator brain finally kicked into gear. The panic vanished. In its place came a cold, hard calculation. They wanted a fight. They had no idea they had just locked themselves in a room with a woman who dismantles fraud schemes for a living. Fine, I said, pulling out a chair opposite Marcus. Let's talk about birthrights, Mr. Vance cleared his throat with a sound like dry leaves scraping against pavement. He opened his leather briefcase with a snap that echoed through the heavy silence. He pulled out a thick stack of papers stapled at the top and slid them across the mahogany table toward me. The document was titled Voluntary Relinquishment of Executorship and Transfer of Assets. I stared at the bold letters. The ink looked fresh. They must have printed this hours ago while I was speeding down the highway, panicking about my mother's imaginary collapse. Mr. Vance began to read aloud in a monotone voice, devoid of any shame. This agreement stipulates that Maya Chen Brooks hereby voluntarily surrenders all rights, titles, and interests in the estate of Solomon Brooks to Marcus Chen Brooks. This transfer is necessitated by the preservation of family tradition and the logical maintenance of lineage, which dictates that primary assets and decision-making powers reside with the male head of household. I looked up from the paper. My eyes locked on Mother Regina. She was smoothing the tablecloth, refusing to look at me. Gender and tradition. That was their legal argument. In the 21st century, they were trying to use outdated patriarchy as a loophole to rob me blind. Marcus chuckled. He leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking under his weight. He picked up a gold pen that I recognized immediately. It was Grandfather Solomon's pen, the one he used to sign checks for my college tuition. Marcus was holding it like a toy, twirling it between his fingers. Don't look so shocked, Maya, Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. It's just the natural order of things. You're good at what you do, sis. Really, you're great at sitting in a cubicle and counting other people's pennies. You have that cute little calculator brain. You obsess over receipts and tax codes and petty discrepancies. That's adorable. It really is. But running an empire, managing real wealth and property, that takes vision. That takes a man's touch. Bianca let out a small, breathy laugh, covering her mouth with her hand. Marcus keeps telling you, Maya, she chimed in. Your job is so stressful. Hunting for fraud all day must make you so cynical and paranoid. We're trying to relieve you of a burden here. You should be thanking him. I looked down at the document again. My investigator eyes scanned the text automatically. I wasn't reading it as a granddaughter. I was reading it as an auditor. I noticed the deliberately vague language in paragraph 3. I noticed the complete lack of a specific asset schedule. They were trying to get me to sign a blank check, essentially handing over control of everything grandfather built before I even knew what everything actually was. So let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice low and dangerous. You want me to sign over a multi-million-dollar estate because I'm a woman and my job involves numbers. And you, Marcus, the man who tried to sell cryptocurrency courses on Instagram last year and lost $8,000, are the visionary here? Marcus's smile faltered for just a second, but he recovered quickly. That was a market correction, he snapped. You wouldn't understand calculated risk, Maya. You're too busy counting copper pennies while I'm trying to mine for gold. Just sign the papers. Mom wants you to sign. Don't you, Mom? Mother Regina finally looked up. Her eyes were hard and cold as ice. Sign it, Maya, she said firmly. Your brother needs this capital to launch his luxury car detailing franchise. It's what your grandfather would have wanted if he'd been in his right mind at the end. Don't be selfish, mister. Vance pushed the document closer to my hand. Just a signature right there on the line, miss. Chen Brooks, and you can leave. No more medical emergencies. No more trouble. I looked at the pen in Marcus's hand. I looked at the contract. That was essentially a modern-day slavery agreement binding me to silence and poverty while they drained the estate dry. They really thought I was stupid. They thought I was just a girl who counted pennies. They forgot that I count pennies to send people to prison. Mother Regina sighed heavily. The kind of theatrical sigh that usually signaled the beginning of a guilt trip strong enough to sink a battleship. She reached across the table. Her hand hovered near mine, but didn't quite touch it, as if I were contagious. Maya, baby, you're breaking my heart, she said. Her voice trembled with practiced fragility that I'd seen her use on deacons and pastors for decades. Don't you remember everything I sacrificed for you? I worked my fingers to the bone for this family. I worked double shifts at the hospital just to keep designer clothes on your back. I went without vacations so you could have college funds. I gave up my youth, my dreams, everything, just to make sure you and your brother had opportunities. I sat there stone-faced, listening to her rewrite history in real time. The truth was a ledger she had shredded long ago, but I had kept the digital backups in my mind. I remembered being 17 years old, working the closing shift at Target, restocking shelves until my hands were raw, not for spending money, but because the electricity bill was 3 months overdue and the red disconnect notice was taped to the front door. I remembered coming home to a dark house because Mother Regina had spent the utility money on a new designer handbag for Marcus's high school graduation. I remembered paying for my own sats. I remembered taking out student loans that I was still paying off while she bought Marcus a car he totaled 2 weeks later. She didn't sacrifice for me. I survived her. But you've always been ungrateful, she continued, wiping a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. You take and never give back. Now, when your brother finally has a chance to build something real, to carry on the family name, you want to stand in his way. Is that how I raised you? To be so cold? To be so selfish? I opened my mouth to speak, to list the receipts I'd kept in my head for over a decade, but Bianca cut me off. She leaned forward, her blonde highlights falling over her shoulder, her eyes wide with fake concern. Honestly, Maya, I don't understand why this is even an issue for you, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You're single. You have no children. You live in that tiny apartment downtown with no one to care for but yourself. What do you even need money for? Marcus has a family to think about. He has a vision. He's trying to build a legacy for all of us. You need to stop thinking about yourself for once and think about the family unit. Marcus nodded vigorously, puffing out his chest like a rooster taking credit for sunrise. Exactly, babe, he said. I'm talking generational wealth, Maya. I'm talking about putting the Brooks name on skyscrapers in this city. And you're worried about your little savings account and your little career. You're holding us back, sis. Just sign the paper and let the men handle the business side of things. The room felt small and suffocating. The gaslighting was so thick I could taste it like poison. They were trying to make me feel small. They were trying to erase my struggle and paint my independence as selfishness. They wanted me to believe that my financial stability was somehow an insult to their reckless ambition. I looked at the pen again. I looked at my mother, who was watching me with hard, expectant eyes. She didn't see a daughter. She saw a piggy bank she could break open to feed her golden child. Mr. Vance leaned in closer. The smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne wafted off his wrinkled suit. If you refuse to sign, Miss Chen Brooks, we will have no choice but to take alternative measures, he said. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, meant to be terrifying. We have prepared a statement for the ethics board of your firm. It outlines certain financial irregularities we have allegedly uncovered in your personal accounts. Unexplained deposits, questionable transfers. It would be a shame if your professional reputation was destroyed before your career really took off. A fraud investigator accused of fraud herself. You would never work in this industry again. A cold chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just greed. This was pure malice. They were willing to destroy my livelihood, my entire future, just to get their hands on money they hadn't earned. Marcus was grinning now, a predator who thought he'd cornered his prey. Don't look at me like that, Maya, he said. It's just business. You sign the papers and the statement disappears. You walk away clean. You don't sign and, well, let's just say the internet is forever. Once a rumor starts, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. You know how it works in your field. I looked around the table. My mother's eyes were hard and unyielding. Bianca was checking her manicure, bored with the violence of the moment. Vance and his partner were stone-faced mercenaries waiting for orders. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of all my defenses and options. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Instead, I started to count. I pointed my finger at Vance. 1. I moved my finger to his partner. 2. I pointed at Marcus. 3. I pointed at Bianca. 4. I pointed at Mother Regina. 5. You brought a lot of people, I said, my voice calm and conversational as if I were commenting on the weather. 5 against 1. Those are excellent odds for a bully. You wanted to make sure I felt outnumbered. You wanted to make sure I felt powerless. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I picked up my purse from the floor and slung it over my shoulder. I looked Marcus dead in the eye, and for the first time, his grin faltered. Funny thing is, I said, a small cold smile playing on my lips, I only brought one person too. The room went absolutely silent. Marcus looked at the door, confusion clouding his face. Mother Regina frowned. Who, Maya? Marcus asked, his voice cracking slightly. Who did you bring? I didn't answer. I just walked to the front door and opened it wide. Standing on the porch was a man in a wheelchair. He was elderly, his skin weathered like ancient leather, but his eyes were sharp and crystal clear. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus's leased Escalade. Behind him stood a large man in a dark suit, his hand resting protectively on the wheelchair handle. The old man wheeled himself into the foyer. The rubber tires were silent on the hardwood floor. He stopped at the entrance to the dining room and looked around the table. His gaze landed on Mother Regina like a physical weight. Mother Regina gasped. Her hand flew to her throat. Her face went completely gray. She looked as if she'd just seen a ghost rise from the grave. Mr. Wellington, she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine terror. The old man didn't smile. He just looked at her, then at the papers scattered across the table. Hello, Regina, he said. His voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "I hear you're trying to give away my money." The room went deathly quiet. It was the kind of silence that usually happens right before a tornado touches down and destroys everything in its path. Mr. Wellington sat there in his wheelchair, looking at them with eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply tapped his finger on the armrest of his chair. That small rhythmic sound was louder than any scream could have been. Mr. Vance tried to regain his composure. He straightened his tie, but his fingers were fumbling badly. "Who are you, sir?" he asked, his voice losing all its gravel and authority. "This is a private family legal matter. You have no business being here, Mr. Wellington didn't answer. He didn't even blink. He just nodded to his bodyguard. The large man in the dark suit stepped forward and reached into his breast pocket. Marcus jumped back in his seat, knocking his knee hard against the table. I saw the raw fear flash across his eyes. He thought it was a weapon. In a way, he was right. The bodyguard pulled out a small, weathered business card. It looked ancient. The edges were frayed and the paper was yellowed with time and handling. He slid it across the mahogany table. It stopped exactly in front of Mr. Vance. There was no phone number on it, no email address, just a name and a small embossed emblem that looked like an eagle holding scales of justice. Vance looked down at it. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide as saucers. His face turned the color of old ashes. He looked at Mr. Wellington with pure, unadulterated panic spreading across his features. "I am so sorry, sir," Vance stammered. He was sweating now, huge drops rolling down his temples. "I didn't know. We weren't informed that there was a conflict of interest of this magnitude. We are leaving immediately," he started, shoving papers back into his briefcase with shaking hands. His partner didn't ask questions. He just followed Vance's lead, moving with the desperate speed of a rat fleeing a sinking ship. "Wait," Marcus shouted, standing up abruptly. "What are you doing? You can't just leave like this. We have a contract. You said this was a done deal. You promised me." Vance didn't even look at him. He snapped his briefcase shut with a final click. "The contract is void, Mr. Chen Brooks. We are done here. Do not contact our firm again, ever." The front door slammed shut behind them, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in the dining room. Marcus looked at Bianca with his mouth hanging open. Bianca looked at her manicure nervously, sensing the power shift but not understanding the history behind it. But Mother Regina understood. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were turning gray. She was trembling, not with the fake frailty she used to manipulate me, but with real, bone-deep terror. She tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace of pain. "Solomon," she whispered, then corrected herself. "I mean, Mr. Wellington, we were just trying to protect the assets. You know how Marcus is. He has vision and drive. We just wanted to keep the legacy alive and thriving." Mr. Wellington just looked at her. His silence was a judgment more powerful than any words. He turned his wheelchair around slowly, the rubber wheels squeaking slightly on the polished floor. "Maya," he said, his voice soft but firm as steel. "Let's go. I have a car waiting outside." I picked up my purse. I didn't look at my brother or his wife. I didn't look at my mother. I walked out the door behind the man who had just saved my life without lifting a single finger. As we exited the house, I heard Marcus start to scream at our mother, demanding to know who the hell that was and what just happened. But for the first time in my entire life, I didn't turn back to fix it or mediate or explain. I just kept walking forward. The interior of Mr. Wellington's sedan smelled like cedar and old money. It was a sharp contrast to the suffocating air of my mother's dining room. The city lights of Houston blurred past the tinted windows as we drove away from the wreckage of my family. I sat in the back seat with my hands still trembling slightly in my lap. Mr. Wellington sat beside me, his breathing labored but steady. He didn't look at me. He looked out the window, watching the streets roll by. "You have his eyes, Maya," he said finally, his voice rough with age and emotion. "Solomon always said you were the only one who actually listened. The only one who saw the numbers instead of just the dollar signs flashing in front of them." His words pulled a trigger deep in my mind. Suddenly I wasn't 29 years old in a luxury car. I was 11 years old, sitting on a milk crate in Grandfather Solomon's garage workshop. The air was thick with the scent of motor oil and sawdust. It was my sanctuary, the only place in the house where Mother Regina's shrill voice couldn't reach me. Grandfather was wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. He looked at me with that same intensity I had just seen in Mr. Wellington's eyes. He pulled a crumpled napkin from his pocket and flattened it on the workbench. He took a pencil from behind his ear. "Look here, baby girl," he had said, tapping the paper with the eraser. "People think getting rich is about hitting the lottery or signing a big contract or getting famous. It's not. It's about this." He wrote a formula on the napkin. A equals P1 plus RNN, compound interest. "Maya," he whispered, like he was sharing a state secret. "It's the eighth wonder of the world. You understand this? And you'll never be a slave to anyone. You let your money work so you don't have to break your back until you die." Poor. I remembered staring at the numbers dancing on the napkin. They made sense in a way that poetry and scripture never did for me. I picked up the pencil and solved the equation he had set up. Grandfather threw his head back and laughed, a deep, booming sound that filled the small space. "You're a shark, Maya," he said, beaming with pride. "A little baby shark swimming in shallow water. We're going to make you a queen of the ocean." Then the door to the house flew open violently. The light from the kitchen spilled into our dim hideout. Mother Regina stood there with her hands on her hips, her face twisted in disapproval and anger. "Solomon, stop filling that girl's head with nonsense," she snapped. "She's covered in grease and dirt. She needs to be inside learning how to set a proper table and host dinner parties, not out here doing math like some nerd. No man wants a wife who's smarter than him. You're ruining her chances." Grandfather had winked at me, a quick, secret gesture, just between us. He hid the napkin in his pocket. "Go on inside, baby girl," he said, his voice gentle. But he slipped a book into my hands before I left. It was a worn copy of The Intelligent Investor wrapped in a brown paper bag so Mother Regina would think it was just a lunch sack. "Read it when everyone's asleep," he whispered in my ear. "Hide it under your mattress." I came back to the present moment. The leather seat felt cool against my skin. Mother Regina had spent my entire childhood trying to keep me out of that garage, trying to keep me away from the knowledge that would set me free. She wanted me compliant and dependent and traditional. She failed spectacularly. Mr. Wellington turned to me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. "Solomon knew this day would come," he said, handing it to me. "He knew they would try to break you down and take everything. That's why he taught you the math, Maya. He wasn't training a granddaughter to be obedient. He was training an executive to be powerful. And now it's time to go to work." I thought the ride with Mr. Wellington was the end of the battle, but I should have known better. Evil doesn't sleep. It just charges its phone and logs into social media to cause more damage. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating so violently, it was practically dancing across my nightstand. I had 63 notifications on Instagram and 15 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped hard. In my line of work, a sudden influx of attention usually meant a data breach or a pending lawsuit. This was worse than either of those. This was family going nuclear. I unlocked my phone and opened the first notification. It was a TikTok video tagged with my full name and my employer's company name. The thumbnail showed Marcus sitting in the front seat of his Escalade, looking disheveled and tearful. He had clearly worked hard to look pathetic and sympathetic. He was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt instead of his flashy suits, and the lighting was dim and dramatically sad. I pressed play with a sense of dread. "Hey guys," Marcus began, his voice cracking with a performance worthy of an Oscar nomination. "I don't usually bring my personal business to this app, but I really need your prayers right now. My family is going through something terrible. Yesterday, my mother, Mother Regina, had a severe health episode. We thought we were losing her. We called my sister Maya to come home because we just wanted the family together. We wanted to make sure Mom was taken care of properly." He wiped a non-existent tear from his cheek and sniffed loudly for dramatic effect. But when Maya got there, she didn't care about Mom at all. She only cared about the money and the inheritance. She brought some strange, intimidating man into our house to threaten us. She shouted at our mother while she was weak and vulnerable. She said she didn't care if Mom died as long as she got her inheritance first. It breaks my heart, y'all. I'm trying to step up. I'm trying to be the man of the house and protect our legacy. But my own sister is trying to bankrupt us and tear this family apart. She works in finance downtown, and she thinks she's better than us. She thinks because she has a degree and a fancy job, She can step on the people who raised her and loved her. He paused for effect, looking directly into the camera with wounded eyes. Please just pray for my mom. We're scared she might not make it through all the stress my sister is causing. Pray for our family. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My mouth went completely dry. The video already had 85,000 views. The comments were a cesspool of judgment and hatred. People were calling me greedy and evil. They were calling me an ungrateful daughter and a selfish witch. They were tagging my employer, demanding to know why they had hired someone who apparently abused elderly family members. Then I saw who had amplified it across every platform. Bianca, my sister-in-law, had shared Marcus's video to every local Facebook group she could find. She posted it in the Houston Prayer Warriors group. She posted it in the Black Professionals Network. She posted it in the Memorial Park Neighborhood Watch. Her caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive venom dripping with fake concern. Please pray for my husband Marcus, she wrote. He's too proud to ask for help, but his sister has completely lost her way and turned her back on family. Greed is a terrible sin that destroys families. We're just trying to keep a roof over Mother Regina's head while Maya tries to evict her own mother from her home. It's heartbreaking when people choose money over blood. Bless her heart, and pray she finds her way back to God. I felt a flash of heat rise up my neck and face. Evict her? I had paid the mortgage on that house for 4 years straight when Marcus was unemployed and playing video games. I had bought half the furniture she was sitting on in those photos. The audacity was absolutely breathtaking. They were weaponizing the community against me. They knew that in our neighborhood, the court of public opinion moved faster and hit harder than the actual legal system. They knew that once a narrative took hold, facts didn't matter anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't leave angry comments. I didn't report the video for harassment or defamation. Instead, I did what I do best. I took screenshots of everything. I downloaded the videos. I saved every single defamatory comment Bianca made with timestamps and permalinks. They wanted to create a narrative. They didn't realize I was building an airtight case file that would be exhibit in their own destruction. Marcus thought he was winning the internet. He didn't realize he was just providing evidence for his own defamation lawsuit and more. I sat up in bed and opened my laptop. If they wanted to play dirty and destroy my reputation, I was about to show them what a real forensic deep dive looked like. The war had just begun, and I was loading my weapons. I needed milk and coffee. It seems like such a small, mundane thing to risk my sanity for. But my refrigerator was empty, and I refused to live like a prisoner hiding in my own city because of lies. I pulled my baseball cap low over my eyes and drove to the Kroger on Westheimer. This was my neighborhood grocery store where I'd shopped for years. I knew the cashiers by name. I knew the layout by heart. I thought I could just slip in and out like a ghost before anyone noticed the woman from the viral video making its rounds. I was dead wrong. The air in the produce section felt thick and oppressive. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the stares. I felt them prickling the back of my neck like tiny needles. Before I even saw who was watching me, I turned the corner by the organic greens and froze, completely, blocking the aisle. Like a human barricade were 3 women in their Sunday church hats. Even though it was a Thursday morning, in the middle stood Sister Patterson, the head usher at Grace Chapel Baptist. She had known me since I was in diapers. She had given me peppermint candies during long sermons and told me I was going to be somebody special one day. Now she was looking at me with eyes full of holy fire and pure hatred. I tried to pivot, to turn around and leave quietly, but she stepped forward. Her cane clacked loudly on the linoleum floor, echoing through the produce section. Maya Chen Brooks, she boomed, her voice carrying over the soft jazz playing through the speakers. I know you see me standing here. Don't you dare try to run away from your judgment and reckoning. I stopped. I took a deep breath. I turned to face her directly. Good morning, Sister Patterson, I said, as calmly as I could manage. She didn't return the greeting. She marched up to me, getting so close I could smell the peppermint and old violets clinging to her skin. Then she did something absolutely unthinkable that I never could have predicted. She gathered saliva in her mouth and spat directly at me. A wet glob landed right on the toe of my expensive leather ankle boot. The store went completely silent. Shoppers froze mid-reach. The stock boy dropped a crate of apples that scattered everywhere. You are a disgrace to your family name, she hissed, her face twisted in a snarl of righteous anger. Your mother called the prayer circle this morning, weeping her eyes out. She told us everything about what you did, how you tried to evict her from her own home, how you cursed her name in the house she built for you, how you abandoned your brother when he needed family support the most. You are a devil child, Maya, an ungrateful, wicked Jezebel who sold her soul for worldly success. I stared at the spit glistening on my boot. It was such a visceral, violent act of contempt. It broke my heart more than Marcus's lying video ever could. Mother Regina hadn't just lied to strangers on the internet. She had weaponized the one thing she knew I valued most in this world, my community and my reputation. She had poisoned the well of my childhood, turning my church family against me. She lied to you, Sister Patterson, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. Mother Regina has a serious gambling problem, and Marcus is stealing from her to pay off loan sharks. I tried to stop them from destroying everything grandfather built. Liar. She screamed so loudly that a young mother nearby pulled her child closer protectively. Don't you dare speak ill of that saint. Regina has sacrificed everything for you ungrateful children, and this is how you repay her generosity. By slandering her name in the streets like common trash. You are not welcome at Grace Chapel anymore. You are not welcome in this neighborhood. If I see you again, I will pray for God himself to strike you down. The other women murmured their agreement in a chorus, creating an impenetrable wall of judgment and condemnation. I realized then that facts didn't matter here at all. Emotion mattered, loyalty mattered, and Mother Regina had played them all like a master violinist playing a priceless instrument. She had cast herself as the suffering martyr and me as the villain, the Judas who betrayed her own family. I looked around the store at faces I had known for 20 years. They looked away or glared with disgust. I was an outcast in the place I had called home my entire life. I stepped back, leaving my basket of groceries abandoned on the floor. I didn't wipe the spit from my boot. I wanted to remember it. I wanted to remember exactly how much their so-called loyalty was actually worth when tested. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice cold and hollow as a winter wind. I don't belong here anymore, because, unlike all of you, I don't worship liars, and I won't bow down to manipulation. I turned and walked out through the automatic doors. The sound of Sister Patterson calling me a Jezebel and a devil fading behind me into background noise. I got into my car and locked all the doors. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely put the key in the ignition. Mother Regina wanted a war. She had turned the entire village against me with practiced ease. Fine, I would burn the village down to get to the truth buried underneath all the lies. I walked into the firm the next morning, with my spine stiff and my head held high. I refused to let the spit on my boot or the whispers in the grocery store dictate my professional life. This office was my sanctuary, my fortress. It was the one place where facts mattered more than feelings, and where logic ruled over manipulation and lies. But the moment the elevator doors slid open on the 45th floor, I knew the infection had spread even here. The office was too quiet. My assistant Jessica, who usually greeted me with a warm smile and a recap of her daughter's soccer games, kept her eyes glued to her computer monitor. She was typing furiously at what I could see was a completely blank screen. Miss Chen Brooks. The voice came from the doorway of the managing partner's corner office. Mr. Sterling stood there, with his arms crossed, his face completely unreadable. In my line of work, an unreadable face is never good news. It usually means an audit failed spectacularly or the federal authorities are waiting in the conference room. Can you step into my office, please? He said quietly, and close the door behind you. I walked past Jessica, feeling the weight of 20 pairs of eyes burning into my back from cubicles and offices. I entered Sterling's office and sat in the chair I had earned through 6 years of flawless service and countless successful cases. Sterling didn't sit down. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Houston skyline like he was searching for answers in the architecture. We received a complaint, Maya, he said, without turning around. An anonymous tip came through our ethics hotline at 4 o'clock this morning. It was detailed and specific. It alleges that you have been using firm resources to access private financial records for personal vendettas. It claims you've been leveraging sensitive client data to extort members of your own community and family. I felt the blood drain completely from my face. It was a lie. A bold, disgusting, calculated lie. But in forensic accounting and fraud investigation, reputation is everything. It's the currency we trade in. An accusation like this is like throwing a grenade into a glass house. Mr. Sterling, I started, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my throat. You know my record. I follow protocol to the letter, every single time. This is a personal attack from my family. They're trying to destroy my career because I won't hand over an inheritance. Sterling finally turned around. He looked exhausted and disappointed. He slid a piece of paper across his mahogany desk. It was a printout of the anonymous email. I scanned the text quickly. The grammar was decent, but the tone was unmistakable. It used phrases like ungrateful daughter and moral bankruptcy. It mentioned my salary with specifics that only family members would know or guess at. It referenced the incident at the grocery store yesterday, framing it as me verbally assaulting an elderly church elder. This is my brother Marcus, I said firmly, pushing the paper back across the desk. He's trying to blackmail me into signing over a multi-million-dollar estate. He's using you and this firm as a weapon to get to me. Sterling sighed deeply. He picked up my security badge, which was lying on the desk. I hadn't even realized he had taken it until that very moment. I believe you, Maya, he said quietly. You're my best investigator and one of the most ethical people I've ever worked with. But corporate policy is absolutely ironclad on this. When a complaint of this nature involves potential misuse of confidential data, we have to investigate thoroughly. My hands are completely tied here. He paused, and I felt my world starting to crumble. You're being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, he continued. 2 weeks paid, but you have to surrender your laptop, your work phone, and your building access. You have to leave the building within the hour. I stared at him in complete disbelief. I had made this firm millions of dollars. I had uncovered massive fraud schemes that saved pensions and put white-collar criminals behind bars. I had worked 80-hour weeks and sacrificed weekends and holidays, and now I was being walked out like a common criminal because Marcus decided to play dirty. I stood up slowly. I reached into my bag and pulled out my company phone and laptop. I placed them gently on the desk next to my badge. I didn't argue. I didn't beg or plead. I knew that arguing with corporate policy was like yelling at a concrete wall. I understand completely, I said, with as much dignity as I could muster. Do your investigation. Check every single log and access record. You'll see I'm clean. I've never violated protocol once in 6 years. I walked out of the office, past the staring colleagues and the silent assistant. I took the elevator down alone, 45 floors of descending into uncertainty. When I stepped out onto the busy street, the humid Houston air hit my face like a slap. Marcus thought he had won. He thought by taking my job, he had taken my power and my ability to fight back. He was dead wrong. He hadn't disarmed me. He had just cleared my entire schedule. I now had 2 weeks with absolutely nothing to do but focus entirely and completely on destroying him. He wanted a fraud investigator to look into his finances? Well, he was about to get exactly what he asked for. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my apartment address. It was time to go to work for real. My apartment was dark except for the amber glow of street lights filtering through the blinds. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, but sleep felt like a distant memory from a past life I no longer lived. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by bank statements, printed emails, and highlighted documents. The silence of the night was heavy and oppressive, pressing against my eardrums. Then the sudden vibration of my phone shattered it like glass. The screen lit up with a photo I had taken years ago, Mother Regina smiling in her favorite Sunday hat, looking exactly like the matriarch everyone believed she was. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but my training kicked in hard. Evidence. Always collect the evidence. I pressed the record button on my secondary device first, then accepted the call. I didn't say hello. I just held the phone to my ear and waited in silence. Maya, baby, are you awake? Her voice was soft, dripping with that sickly sweet concern she used when the pastor came over for Sunday dinner. It was the voice of a saint. It was the voice of a snake. I know you're hurting right now, she continued, filling my silence with her carefully rehearsed performance. I heard about what happened at your job. Marcus told me everything. It's such a shame, really. You worked so hard for that little career of yours. But you know what the Bible says, sweetheart? Pride comes before destruction. You were getting too proud, Maya. You were forgetting where you came from and who raised you. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I knew Marcus had sent that email. I knew she had orchestrated the entire takedown like a puppet master pulling strings, but I stayed completely silent. I let the recording run, capturing every single syllable of her manipulation for posterity. "We can fix this, baby," she cooed like she was comforting a small child. "We can make it all go away like it never happened. Marcus knows important people. He can withdraw the complaint. He can tell them it was all just a big misunderstanding. But you have to meet us halfway, sweetheart. You have to come back to the fold where you belong." There was a rustling sound on the line, like she was shifting positions in her bed, getting comfortable for the kill. "Just sign the papers, Maya. That's all you have to do. Sign the transfer documents and give Marcus the authority he needs and deserves. He's your brother. He's the man of the family now that grandfather is gone. It's his burden to carry, not yours. Why do you want to carry a load that wasn't meant for your shoulders? You're just a woman. Let the men handle the business." Her voice dropped lower, becoming intimate and absolutely chilling. "I'm only doing this because I love you more than life itself. I'm your mother. I brought you into this world. I just want what's best for you, baby." A woman alone in this city, with no family support and no job security. That's a dangerous thing. We are your protection. Without us, you have absolutely nothing and no one. Sign the papers, Maya. Come home. Let me take care of you like I used to when you were my little girl. The line went quiet. She was waiting for me to break down. She was waiting for the scared little girl to apologize and beg for forgiveness and acceptance. But that little girl had died the moment Sister Patterson spat on my boot in the grocery store. I ended the call without saying a single word. I saved the recording and immediately backed it up to 3 different cloud servers with timestamps. She thought she was offering me a lifeline and a way back. She didn't realize she had just handed me a full confession on a silver platter. She admitted they caused the job loss. She admitted it was deliberate leverage. She admitted the whole conspiracy. I looked at my reflection in the dark window across the room. She wanted what was best for me. No, she wanted what was best for Marcus. And she was willing to burn my entire life to the ground just to keep her golden child warm. I stood up and walked to my home office desk. I was done being the victim in this story. It was time to become the hunter. I stared at the black screen of my personal laptop for a long moment. Not a single tear fell. My eyes were dry as the Sahara Desert and twice as hot with rage. The sadness that had been weighing on my chest for days evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, mechanical, calculating fury. Mother Regina had made a fatal error in judgment. She thought she was speaking to her daughter, the scared little girl who used to hide in the closet when bill collectors came knocking on the door. She forgot she was actually speaking to a certified fraud examiner who had taken down CEOs and politicians twice as intelligent as her. I walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of my wine down the sink drain. I needed to be razor sharp. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee, the kind that tastes like jet fuel, and carried a steaming mug into my second bedroom. This was my sanctuary and command center. It was climate-controlled and soundproofed with thick curtains. 3 curved monitors sat on a large glass desk, all hooked up to a custom-built tower that hummed with serious processing power. I sat down in my leather chair and cracked my knuckles deliberately. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment like a gunshot signaling the start of a race. They wanted to play dirty? They wanted to use anonymous emails and whisper campaigns to destroy my livelihood? They wanted to starve me out and force me into submission? Fine, absolutely fine. If they wanted a war, I would give them a nuclear winter they would never forget. I woke up my computer. The screens flared to life, casting a cold blue glow across my face. I didn't log into my work server. I was suspended after all, and I followed the rules religiously, but I didn't need corporate access to find what I was looking for. I had my own personal subscriptions. I had access to public record databases that most people didn't even know existed. I had skip tracing software. I had the skills and knowledge to connect dots that looked like separate islands to the naked eye. I opened a new encrypted case file on my secure drive. I typed the name at the top, Operation Family Values. Then I started entering names with cold precision. Marcus Chen Brooks, Bianca Miller Brooks, Regina Chen Brooks. I entered their social security numbers, which I knew by heart because I had done their taxes for free for over a decade. Like a fool, I entered their addresses, their known associates, their email addresses, their phone numbers. You want to talk about morality, mother? I whispered to the glowing screen as my fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. Let's see what the numbers have to say about your so-called morals and ethics. I started with the low-hanging fruit that anyone could access: credit reports, civil court records, property liens, business registrations, bankruptcy filings. I didn't need a warrant or subpoena to see what they had done in the full public eye. People like Marcus are dangerously arrogant. They think because they delete a text message or shred a paper statement that the record is completely gone forever. They don't understand that financial data is like energy in physics. It's never actually destroyed. It just changes form and location. It becomes a digital footprint that lasts forever in databases and backups. The first search query completed. A list of results populated on the left screen. I scanned the dates and the dollar amounts with trained eyes. My eyebrows shot up. I saw a civil judgment from a small claims court to counties over. I saw a vehicle repossession order from 8 months ago. I saw a stack of unpaid parking tickets, and that was just the appetizer course. They tried to bury me alive. They tried to take my professional license and my reputation. But they forgot one absolutely crucial thing in their arrogance. I am the one who knows where all the bodies are buried. Because I'm the one who paid for the shovels that dug the graves. I took a long sip of bitter coffee and leaned forward into the screens. The hunt had officially begun. And I was an apex predator who had just caught the scent of blood. I typed Marcus's full name into the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry database first. He had spent the entire last year bragging constantly about his upcoming luxury car detailing franchise, posting carefully staged photos of blueprints and empty commercial lots on Instagram with captions about the grind and building an empire and securing the bag. I typed in every possible variation I could think of. Brooks Auto Detailing, Marcus Enterprises, Chen Brooks Luxury Motors, Brooks Brothers Automotive. The database blinked back at me with 0 results. Nothing. Not a single hit. There was no LLC registered. There was no business license filed. There was no employer identification number on record anywhere. His entire entrepreneurial persona was nothing but smoke and mirrors and Instagram filters and lies. He wasn't a businessman building an empire. He was just an unemployed man with a data plan, a camera phone, and a massive delusion. I switched browser tabs to the County Civil Court Records database. This is where the real truth usually hides in plain sight, waiting for someone to look. I searched for any judgments against Marcus Chen Brooks. The screen populated instantly, like a slot machine hitting a jackpot of failure. I saw 4 eviction notices in the last 6 years. I saw a lawsuit from a credit card company for $32,000. I saw a repossession order for a luxury sedan. He had claimed on social media he bought with cash money, but then I saw the one document that made my breath catch in my throat and my heart start racing. It was a lien filed 9 months ago. The creditor was a holding company based in Nevada with a generic corporate name. In my line of work, you learn very quickly to recognize these shell company names. This was a front company for one of the largest offshore sports betting and gambling platforms in the entire world. The amount owed was absolutely staggering: $315,000. I leaned back in my chair and let out a low whistle. That echoed in the quiet room. $315,000 in gambling debt. That wasn't a bad investment or a market correction or an unfortunate business deal gone wrong. That was a catastrophic, life-destroying addiction spiraling completely out of control. Marcus wasn't trying to build a car detailing empire. He was desperately trying to wash away over $300,000 in gambling debt before someone came to collect more than just money, before they came to collect his kneecaps, or worse. He had literally bet the house, a house he didn't even own yet, on schemes and dreams and long-shot bets. I dug deeper into his credit report, my fingers flying across the keys. It was an absolute financial bloodbath and disaster. His credit score was in the low 400s, barely above rock bottom. He had maxed out 9 different credit cards. He had taken out payday loans with interest rates that bordered on legally criminal. He had opened store credit accounts and defaulted on every single one. And the absolute worst part, the part that made my stomach turn, the co-signer on his most recent high-risk personal loan was Mother Regina herself. She had put her name and her credit on a $50,000 personal loan just 2 months ago, sealing her fate to his sinking ship. The picture was crystal clear now, sharp as high-definition video. The urgency of their ambush meeting, the threats to my career, the desperate manipulation. They weren't trying to expand some imaginary empire or build generational wealth. They were trying to stop a massive financial hemorrhage before they both drowned in debt. Marcus was drowning in gambling addiction, and instead of learning to swim or asking for help, he had decided to use me as a human life raft, sacrificing me to save himself. He needed grandfather Solomon's estate money, not to grow or invest or build anything. He needed it desperately, just to stay alive and out of the hospital. He was desperate and cornered. And desperate men make sloppy, stupid, traceable mistakes. I printed every court document. I printed the lien. I printed the credit report with all 9 Max cards highlighted. I placed them all in a crisp new folder labeled Marcus Financial Crimes. 1 villain thoroughly documented and destroyed. 2 more to go. I closed the Marcus folder and cracked my knuckles again, stretching my fingers. Next up was Bianca, my dear sister-in-law, who walked around Houston like she was displaced. Royalty waiting for her kingdom to be restored. She wore designer labels to Target and spoke with an affected drawl that suggested her family had owned oil fields since the 1800s. She loved to make subtle comments about my apartment being cozy or my car being practical, always implying she came from serious generational wealth and was just waiting patiently for Marcus to catch up to her elevated level. She played the part of the supportive trophy wife, absolutely perfectly. But in my extensive experience, real trophies don't usually ask quite so many detailed questions about estate planning and asset distribution. I typed her maiden name Bianca Miller and her social security number into the federal bankruptcy court database. It's a standard background check I run for every major fraud investigation I handle. People who actually have old money usually know exactly how to protect it through trusts and legal structures. People who pretend to have money usually end up right here in bankruptcy court. The screen refreshed, and there it was, glowing like a neon sign. A Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing from 5 years ago in rural East Texas, not far from the Louisiana border. It wasn't a sophisticated corporate restructuring. It was a personal liquidation, a complete financial wipeout. She had walked away from $68,000 in credit card debt, a repossessed Honda Accord, and unpaid medical bills. Her listed occupation at the time of filing was receptionist, not the high-end interior design consultant she claimed to be on her carefully curated LinkedIn profile. Her address wasn't some plantation estate or family compound. It was a rental unit in a low-income complex that had more code violations than actual tenants. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. The Southern Belle was actually just a broke girl from nowhere running an elaborate long con. She had completely reinvented herself, moved to the big city, and strategically targeted the first man she thought had real potential and family money. She had latched onto Marcus like a parasite because she thought the Brooks name meant endless cash flow and generational wealth. She must be absolutely terrified right now, slowly realizing her golden goose was actually already cooked and served. But the bankruptcy was just the origin story, the backstory. The real ongoing crime was hiding in the current banking transactions. I pulled up the transaction history for the joint checking account she shared with Marcus. It was a complete mess of overdraft fees and luxury purchases that made no financial sense. But buried deep in all that noise were recurring transfers that caught my trained eye. $700 here, $400 there, $550. They were sent via Zelle to names I didn't recognize at first. T. Miller B. Miller D. Miller. I cross-referenced the names with her bankruptcy filing documents. They were her parents and her younger sister back in East Texas. Bianca knew everything. She absolutely knew Marcus was drowning in gambling debt. She knew he was borrowing money from dangerous loan sharks. She knew he was stealing and manipulating. But instead of stopping him or getting him help, she was actively skimming money off the top of his schemes. She was taking whatever money Marcus managed to steal or swindle and quietly sending it back to East Texas to pay her family's bills and keep them afloat. She wasn't a supportive wife standing loyally by her man through hard times. She was a parasite feeding on a dying host, taking whatever she could before the body went cold. She was urgently pushing Marcus to fight for the inheritance. Not because she believed in his vision or his potential, but because she desperately needed a fresh injection of cash to keep her own family from drowning. She was willing to completely destroy my life and career just to pay her mother's rent and her sister's car payment. I printed the bankruptcy decree with all its shameful details. I highlighted every Zelle transfer in bright neon yellow. I put them all in a folder labeled Bianca Financial Fraud and Conspiracy, two villains completely exposed and documented. And now it was finally time for the matriarch, the woman who orchestrated it all, the woman who taught me how to pray and then deliberately preyed on me. I saved the absolute best for last, Mother Regina, the woman who quoted scripture while systematically picking your pocket, the woman who could cry on command and weaponize guilt like a master assassin. I opened the archive file for Grandfather Solomon's primary checking account. This was the account where his pension checks were automatically deposited every single month for over 20 years. It was supposed to be his safety net, his money for medicine and comfort and dignity in his final years. Mother Regina had always insisted on handling all of his banking because his eyesight was supposedly failing. She called it an act of loving service and family duty. I called it exactly what it was, an opportunity for theft. I pulled up the digital images of cash checks going back 7 years. Grandfather had a very distinctive signature that I remembered clearly from birthday cards. He had developed a slight tremor in his hands as he aged from his medication. His signature lines were shaky and uneven. The loops of his letters were jagged, like a seismograph reading during an earthquake. I looked at a check from 8 years ago. It was completely authentic. The tremor was clearly visible. The ink pressure was uneven and natural. Then I scrolled forward to 6 years ago, January 23rd specifically. The check was made out to cash in all capitals. The amount was $5,000, a significant withdrawal. I zoomed in on the signature line until it filled my entire screen. The signature was smooth and flowing. The lines were confident and perfectly steady. The tremor that had defined his handwriting was completely gone. It was a miraculous healing, but only on paper. But Grandfather hadn't been healed. His hands had shaken with that tremor until the day he died. I had held those shaking hands at his bedside. This signature was a forgery. And it wasn't even a particularly good or careful forgery. It was lazy and arrogant. I pulled up a birthday card Mother Regina had sent me 2 years ago. I still had it in my desk drawer. I scanned it carefully and uploaded the image. Then I overlaid her natural handwriting onto the forged check signature using my professional forensic analysis software. It was a perfect match. The slant of the letters, the way the pen lifted at the end of each word, the pressure points, the flow. It was definitely her hand. She hadn't even tried to mimic his tremor or copy his style. She had just signed his name with her own natural flow, arrogantly assuming no one would ever look closely enough to catch her theft. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This pattern started 6 years ago. Grandfather was still alive then. He was still sitting in his favorite recliner, listening to his old jazz records and telling stories. And while he sat there, trusting her completely, his own daughter was in the kitchen forging his signature and writing checks to herself, systematically draining his life savings dollar by dollar. I scrolled through month after month of statements. 5,000, here, 7,000, there, 3,000, 12,000 in 1 month. She had siphoned off nearly $250,000 over 6 years, while he was still breathing and trusting her completely. She had used his money, his pension, that he earned through decades of hard work to buy those designer church hats and that Cadillac she loved so much. She had let me pay the mortgage and utilities while she was actively robbing a dying man blind. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This wasn't just drama or greed. Forging someone's signature on financial documents to access their pension funds is federal bank fraud. It's identity theft. It's elder abuse of the most disgusting kind. These are serious federal crimes with mandatory minimum sentences. Mother Regina wasn't looking at a slap on the wrist or community service. She was looking at real prison time in a federal penitentiary. She wanted to lecture me about God's money and family values. Well, she was about to find out that the IRS and the FBI are far less forgiving than Jesus Christ. I printed every single forged check. I printed my forensic handwriting analysis report with comparison overlays. I put them all in a red folder labeled Mother Regina Elder Abuse and Bank Fraud. The case was closed and airtight. I had them all completely dead to rights, with irrefutable evidence. But I wasn't finished yet. There was still one more piece of this puzzle. I opened the file marked Real Estate Assets. This was the crown jewel, the holy grail that Marcus was willing to sell his own sister out to acquire. It was an old warehouse on the edge of the 3rd Ward district. 10 years ago, it had been essentially worthless, just a pile of bricks and memories where grandfather stored old equipment and parts. But now the neighborhood was changing rapidly. The corner stores were becoming artisanal coffee shops. The old barber shops were turning into boutique fitness studios. Gentrification had arrived with a vengeance. And that dusty plot of land was suddenly sitting on what appeared to be a potential gold mine. Marcus had been bragging all over social media about his grand plans. He was going to sell it to developers for millions, or build his luxury car detailing empire right there on that corner. He had already spent the money in his delusional head. He had promised the loan sharks a major payout based entirely on the supposed valuation of that land. He was literally betting his life on that property deed. I pulled up the property tax records from the county database. Everything looked normal at first glance. Solomon Brooks listed as owner, taxes paid and current, no liens or encumbrances visible, but something was bothering me, nagging at the back of my investigator brain. There was a small discrepancy in the zoning code listed on the county website versus the physical legal description in grandfather's personal files that I had access to. I dug deeper, going back further. I went back to the original acquisition documents from 1968. Most amateur investigators stop at the easily accessible digital records. I don't stop. I never stop until I find the truth. I went into the scanned archives, the dusty microfiche files that had been digitized decades ago but never properly indexed or cross-referenced. I found the original transfer deed. It was typewritten on an old manual typewriter in fading ink. I read it once carefully. Then I read it again, even more slowly. Then I started to laugh out loud. It was a cold, dark laugh that bounced off the walls of my empty apartment at 3 in the morning. Grandfather Solomon hadn't actually bought the land outright. He never technically owned it in fee simple, attached to the back of the deed, scanned into a PDF file that Marcus and his cheap lawyers had definitely never bothered to open or read, was a document titled Ground Lease Agreement 99-year term. The land belonged to the railroad company, which had since been acquired by the city's Metropolitan Transit Authority. Grandfather had signed a 99-year ground lease. It was a very common practice back in the 1960 seconds for black business owners who were systematically redlined out of buying property outright by racist banking practices. I looked at the date on the original contract with mounting excitement. March 15, 1968. I pulled up my calculator and did the simple math that would destroy Marcus completely. 1968 plus 99 years equals 2067. No, wait. I rechecked the document. The lease term had a specific clause. Term of lease shall be 99 years from date of execution or until such time as the property is required for public transportation infrastructure development, whichever occurs first. I searched the Metropolitan Transit Authority's public planning documents. And there it was, buried in a city council resolution from 8 months ago, the 3rd Ward Transit Expansion Project. The warehouse property was designated for demolition to make way for a new light rail station. The project had been approved. The lease had been terminated early under the infrastructure clause. The land wasn't an asset worth millions. It was already gone, already claimed by eminent domain. The warehouse was scheduled for demolition in 6 weeks. Marcus was borrowing $300,000 from violent criminals against a piece of property that had literally zero value. It was worse than worthless. It was a liability with demolition costs attached. He was going to walk into a closing meeting, expecting a check for millions, and instead he was going to receive an eviction notice and a bill for environmental cleanup. And when those loan sharks discovered his collateral was nothing but air and lies, they wouldn't be filing paperwork or taking him to court. They would be looking for blood and bone. I sat back in my chair, the weight of what I'd discovered settling over me like a heavy blanket. This was it. This was complete and total checkmate. They had destroyed my reputation and tried to ruin my career for something they could never even touch or monetize. I printed the ground lease agreement. I printed the Transit Authority resolution. I highlighted the termination clause and the demolition schedule. I added it all to a new folder. This one I labeled simply, The Mirage. I had everything I needed to completely bury them all in court and in public opinion. But I didn't just want to win in a courtroom where most people would never hear about it. I wanted them to feel the exact same fear I felt when they trapped me in that dining room. I wanted to look them directly in their eyes when their entire world crumbled in two. It was time to set the stage for the final act of this tragedy. The preparation for Sunday service began exactly 48 hours before the scheduled execution. I watched the digital footprint of my family expand with the reckless confidence of people who thought they had already won the lottery and were just waiting to cash the ticket. Marcus couldn't wait even a single day. According to the credit inquiry alert that pinged on my monitoring software, he was at the Mercedes dealership in River Oaks by 10 a.m. Saturday morning. I could practically hear his voice, loud and arrogant, as he pointed at the G-Wagon in the pristine showroom. He put down a deposit on a credit card that was already $15,000 over its limit, banking entirely on funds he thought I would hand over on Sunday morning. He was buying a status symbol to drive straight to bankruptcy court. Bianca was celebrating in her own predictable way. Her Instagram story showed her at the Galleria, shopping bags from Neiman Marcus and Gucci piled high. She posted a photo of a diamond tennis bracelet with the caption, "He finally came through #blessedworthwait." She was spending money that didn't exist yet and never would. But the performance that truly made my stomach turn was Mother Regina's calculated manipulation. She didn't go to car dealerships or shopping malls. She went straight to the source of her power and influence. She went directly to Pastor Williams at Grace Chapel. I had a friend who worked on the church's audiovisual team. He sent me the recording from the pastor's office. I listened to it twice, taking notes. Mother Regina's voice was thick with false humility and practiced emotion. "Pastor, I just want to praise God and give him all the glory," she said, with perfect timing. "My prayers have finally been answered, after so much suffering. The prodigal daughter is coming home to the family. Maya has finally seen the error of her ways. She's going to sign over the stewardship to Marcus this Sunday during service. It was such a hard battle, Pastor. I had to be tough on her. I had to show her tough love and set firm boundaries. But she finally broke. She finally humbled herself before God and family. I listened to her take full credit for my supposed submission. She was painting herself as the spiritual warrior who had wrestled my rebellious soul away from the devil of independence and career ambition. She was inviting the entire congregation over, 600 people, to witness her triumph and my public humiliation. She wanted an audience for what she thought would be my defeat. She wanted them all to see me bend the knee and surrender. She had absolutely no idea she was actually inviting 600 witnesses to a crime scene and her own destruction. She was setting the stage perfectly without realizing it. She was making sure the lights were bright and the sound system was crystal clear and the cameras were rolling. She was doing all my work for me. And I didn't have to lift a finger. They were laughing and spending and gloating and celebrating, completely oblivious to the fact that the check they were writing in their minds was going to bounce so hard it would shatter their entire lives into pieces. I closed my laptop and smiled in the darkness of my apartment. It was almost time. Enjoy the champagne and the shopping, Marcus. Enjoy your last weekend of freedom. It's the last celebration you'll ever have. Saturday night found me not in a church pew praying for forgiveness, but in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Mr. Wellington's private estate in River Oaks. The air smelled of expensive leather and aged scotch. Across the long table sat three of the most ruthless corporate litigators and Houston attorneys, who usually charge $1,500 an hour just to answer their phones. Tonight, they were working for me completely pro bono, because Mr. Wellington had personally asked them to. We weren't preparing a sermon or church testimony. We were preparing an indictment that would destroy lives. On the wall, a massive screen displayed the detailed floor plan and schematics of Grace Chapel Baptist Church. Mr. Wellington pointed a shaking finger at the audio-visual booth located high in the balcony. "They will try to cut the microphone," he rumbled, his voice sounding like gravel grinding against steel. "As soon as you start speaking the real truth, Regina will signal the sound technician. He's been on her payroll for years. We cannot rely on their equipment, Maya. We need to bring our own thunder to this battle." I nodded. I had already anticipated this exact scenario. I motioned to the tech specialist standing quietly in the corner with equipment cases. "We have a portable high-lumen projector and a completely standalone sound system with its own independent power supply," I explained confidently. My team will arrive at the church at 5:30 tomorrow morning disguised as the Sunday flower delivery service. We'll rig the massive screen behind the choir stand. When I press the button on my phone, it will override their entire feed. They won't be able to stop it unless they cut power to the entire building and plunge everyone into darkness. Mr. Wellington smiled, and it was a terrifying expression that belonged on a battlefield. Good, he said, with satisfaction. Let them sit in the dark where they belong. It's their natural habitat. He slid a thick, heavy folder across the polished table. It was bright crimson red, the color of blood, the color of warning flags, the color of stop signs, the red file of damnation. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hands, dense with the crushing weight of my family's sins and crimes. Inside were the high-definition screenshots of Marcus's desperate text messages with the loan sharks, the video clips of him destroying my living room and cursing our mother's name, the forensic analysis of Mother Regina's forged checks with my expert testimony, the bankruptcy filings Bianca had tried so hard to hide, the ground lease that proved Marcus's collateral was worthless. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a complete autopsy of their character, morals, and criminal behavior. Everything is verified and authenticated. Henderson asked, his eyes sharp despite his age. Triple-checked and notarized, I replied, my voice steady as stone. Every timestamp, every IP address, every transaction ID, every signature analysis. It's absolutely bulletproof. If they try to sue me for defamation after this, the truth is an absolute defense under law. And this is nothing but gospel truth. Henderson leaned back in his wheelchair, a look of profound sadness crossing his weathered face. Solomon would have hated this public spectacle, he said softly. He loved that boy Marcus, despite everything. He wanted desperately to believe the best in him. But Solomon also hated thieves with a passion. And he hated liars even more. You're doing the right thing, Maya. You're cleaning the house of corruption. I ran my hand over the red cover of the folder, feeling the texture of justice. I didn't feel guilt anymore. I didn't feel hesitation or doubt. I felt the cold clarity of a surgeon preparing to cut out a malignant tumor to save the patient. They wanted a show and a spectacle. They wanted to drag me in front of the community and force me to bow down in submission. Tomorrow isn't Sunday service, I said, standing up and tucking the red file under my arm. Tomorrow is Judgment Day, and I'm bringing the gavel. Grace Chapel Baptist was absolutely vibrating with electric energy. The organist was playing a powerful prelude that shook the stained glass windows in their frames. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and Sunday desperation. 600 people packed the pews shoulder to shoulder, fanning themselves with paper programs that had my face printed on the back under the heading Family Unity Celebration. Mother Regina had truly outdone herself this time. She had turned legal extortion into a ticketed event, a spectacle for the masses. I stood at the back of the sanctuary, clutching the red file against my chest like a shield. From this vantage point, I could see the entire stage, perfectly set for the performance of the century, and there in the front row sat the stars of the show. The main characters in this tragedy. Mother Regina was wearing pure white, not just any white, but a blinding, pristine ivory steety John suit with a matching hat that seemed to defy the laws of gravity and physics. She looked like a dove descended from heaven. She looked like an angel sent straight from glory. She sat with her back ramrod straight, and her hands folded elegantly in her lap. The absolute picture of a righteous matriarch who had prayed her way through the storm and emerged victorious. Every few seconds, a deacon or church mother would lean over to whisper blessings and congratulations to her, and she would nod graciously, accepting their praise for a victory she hadn't yet won. It made my stomach turn violently. She was dressed in the costume of purity while sitting on a throne built entirely of fraud and lies. Next to her sat Marcus and Bianca, playing the role of the young, successful power couple to absolute perfection. Marcus was wearing a navy blue three-piece suit that I knew for a fact he had put on a credit card that was currently maxed out. He had a fresh haircut and a shine on his shoes that could blind someone. He had his arm draped casually over the back of the pew, looking relaxed and confident, like a CEO about to ring the opening bell on Wall Street. He wasn't looking at the altar or the cross. He was looking at his expensive watch, literally counting down the minutes until he thought he would become a millionaire. Bianca sat next to him, wearing a modest designer dress and a string of pearls that were almost certainly real, bought with money she had skimmed from Marcus's stolen funds. She held a hymnal in one perfectly manicured hand and Marcus's hand in the other. She looked demure and supportive. She looked like she had never broken into anyone's house in her entire life. The hypocrisy was so thick in that room I could taste it like poison on my tongue. These people had spent the last 2 weeks systematically destroying my name, terrorizing my peace, and stealing from the very legacy they claimed to want to protect. And here they were, sitting in the front row of God's house in their finest clothes, waiting for me to hand them the keys to a kingdom that didn't exist. They thought I was walking down that aisle to surrender in defeat. They thought the simple black dress I was wearing was a sign of mourning for my lost battle. They didn't realize I was wearing black because I was attending a funeral theirs. I took a deep breath and stepped into the center aisle. It was time to join the congregation and deliver the eulogy. Pastor Williams raised both hands high, and the choir quieted to a soft hum. The lights dimmed throughout the sanctuary, focusing a single dramatic spotlight on the pulpit. Mother Regina stood up slowly, milking every moment. She walked up the stairs to the stage, moving with a calculated slight limp that I had never seen before in my entire life. It was a nice theatrical touch. It made her look frail and wounded. It made her look like she had carried the unbearable weight of the world on her back. She gripped the sides of the podium with both hands and looked out at the sea of faces filling every pew. She let a single perfect tear roll down her cheek before she even spoke a single word. Brothers and sisters, she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. Today is a glorious day of victory, not for me personally, but for the Lord Jesus Christ. For weeks and weeks, my heart has been so heavy with burden. My family has been under vicious attack. The enemy tried everything to tear us apart. He tried to turn sister against brother, daughter against mother. He tried to use greed and pride and worldly ambition to destroy the legacy of my late husband, Solomon Brooks. A chorus of heartfelt amens rippled through the pews like a wave. Mother Regina nodded, accepting the affirmation like a queen receiving tribute. I have prayed night and day without ceasing, she continued, wiping her face with a lace handkerchief. I have been on my knees begging God to soften my daughter's hardened heart. Maya is a good girl deep down. She's intelligent. She's successful in the world. But the world got into her spirit and poisoned her. The city hardened her heart. She forgot that family is the only true wealth we have in this life. She forgot that a woman's place is to support her family, not to fight for control and power. I stood in the back, my hands tightening around the red file until my knuckles turned white. She was painting a masterpiece of lies in real time. She was framing my independence as sin and her manipulation as virtue and godliness. But God is good, she shouted, her voice rising to a crescendo that shook the rafters. God answered my desperate prayers. My daughter has come home. She has realized the error of her ways. She has seen that her brother Marcus is the rightful heir, the one chosen by God to lead this family into the future. She has agreed to step down. She has agreed to sign over the authority she was never meant to hold. She looked directly at me then, pointing a perfectly manicured finger toward the back of the church where I stood. Maya baby, come up here, she called out, her voice dripping with fake warmth. Come, stand with your mother. Come receive the forgiveness of this family and this church. We don't hold your mistakes against you, sweetheart. We love you. We just want you to do the right thing. Come home, child. Come back to the fold. The entire congregation of 600 people turned in their seats to look at me. 600 faces, expectant and judging, waiting for me to walk the aisle of shame. They wanted a repentant sinner. They wanted tears and hugs and a public submission ceremony. Marcus stood up in the front row and turned around, smiling that same smug, victorious smile I'd seen my whole life. He motioned for me to come forward like he was a king welcoming a servant back to the castle. I stepped forward into the aisle. I walked down the center, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor like a countdown. I didn't look down at my feet. I didn't cry. I looked straight ahead at Mother Regina with laser focus. I walked past the whispers. I walked past Sister Patterson, who had spit on me. I walked past all the lies and manipulation. I climbed the stairs to the pulpit slowly and deliberately. Mother Regina opened her arms wide to hug me in front of everyone, but I sidestepped her completely. I walked straight to the microphone and gripped it firmly. I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came for justice. The microphone felt cold and heavy in my hand, like a weapon of truth. I stood at the pulpit looking out at the sea of 600 faces. The silence in the sanctuary was absolutely profound and complete. 600 people were literally holding their breath, waiting for the climax they thought they knew was coming. They wanted tears of repentance. They wanted a public confession. They wanted to see the arrogant career woman broken down and humbled before her mother and her God. Mother Regina stood just a few feet away from me. She was dabbing her eyes with that lace handkerchief again, even though her cheeks were completely dry. She gestured toward the small table set up next to the altar. On it lay the transfer documents, a gold pen, and a Bible arranged like props in a stage play. It was a perfect tableau of manipulation, designed to make refusal look like blasphemy against God himself. Go ahead, baby, Mother Regina whispered, leaning close enough for the microphone to pick up her voice, but soft enough to sound intimate and caring. Just tell them you're sorry for causing trouble. Sign the papers and let us be a family again. Make your brother proud. Do the right thing. I looked down at Marcus in the front row. He was practically vibrating with barely contained anticipation. He had unbuttoned his suit jacket, ready to spring up and accept his imaginary crown. He locked eyes with me and nodded with an arrogant tilt of his chin that said, I win. He thought he had broken me completely. He thought the pressure of the church and the lies of our mother had finally crushed my spirit into submission. He didn't see the fire burning in my eyes. He only saw ashes. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and old wood polish. I gripped the sides of the podium. My knuckles didn't turn white. My hands were steady as steel. I was not a sinner asking for redemption. I was a prosecutor making an opening statement. Thank you, Mother, I said, my voice booming through the high-quality sound system. My words echoed off the stained glass windows. You're absolutely right about one thing. Today is definitely a day of revelation. You brought this entire community here to witness the truth about the Brooks family. You wanted them to see exactly who we are when the doors are closed and the curtains are drawn. The congregation murmured softly, a chorus of amens. They were nodding and swaying slightly. Thinking I was about to launch into a testimony of repentance and reconciliation, Mother Regina beamed with a beatific smile that didn't quite reach her predatory eyes. You spoke about love, I continued, keeping my gaze fixed on the back wall where my tech team was positioned. You spoke about sacrifice. You told these good people that Marcus is the future of this family and that I'm the past. That needs to be corrected. You told them we are united in faith. I paused deliberately. The tension in the room ratcheted up significantly. Something in my tone was shifting from humble to sharp, from soft to cutting. But words are easy, Mother, I said, turning to look her dead in the eyes. Anyone can say they love family. Anyone can claim they want to protect grandfather's legacy. But the Bible says very clearly that we shall know them by their fruits. And before I sign my name on that paper, before I hand over everything grandfather Solomon built with his own hands, I think this congregation deserves to see the fruit. Marcus's confident smile faltered noticeably. He sat up straighter in the pew. Courtney stopped fanning herself. They both sensed the dramatic change in the atmosphere. The air had gone from celebratory to electric with tension. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black remote control. I held it up high so everyone in the sanctuary could see it clearly. I prepared a short video presentation, I announced, my voice dropping to a register of deadly calm. I think it's important that everyone sees exactly how much love was in my apartment last week when my family came to visit. I clicked the button. I call this presentation, The True Face of Family Love. Mother Regina's eyes went wide with panic. She reached desperately for my arm. Maya, what are you doing? She hissed urgently. Stop this right now. I stepped smoothly away from her grasping hands. I pressed the button on the remote. Behind the choir stand, the massive projection screen that was usually used for hymn lyrics and announcements flickered to life. The church logo vanished. The screen went black for just a second, building suspense. Then a high-definition video feed appeared with crystal-clear audio. The date stamp read 1 week ago. The location stamp said Chen Brooks' residence living room, and the audio was absolutely perfect. The giant screen lit up with a clarity that was almost cruel in its detail. The sound of glass shattering explosively filled the church through every speaker, making half the deacon board physically jump in their seats. On the screen, Marcus was swinging a crowbar like an absolute madman possessed. The congregation gasped as one unified organism. They watched the man currently sitting in the front row in a three-piece suit completely destroy my living room in high definition. He ripped cushions apart. He kicked furniture over. He looked genuinely demon-possessed. Bianca was there too, on the screen, frantically digging through my personal papers like a desperate rat. Her voice rang out shrill and panicked, amplified by the church sound system. "We need that seal, Marcus. The sharks are going to kill us both if we don't pay by midnight tomorrow." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the pews. Sharks? Gambling debt? The picture of the successful young entrepreneur was cracking apart like thin ice, but that was just the warm-up act. The real devastating blow was still coming. On the screen, Marcus stopped destroying my furniture. He turned to face the hidden camera unknowingly. His face was twisted with pure hatred and rage. "This is all Mother's fault," he screamed, his voice filling every corner of the sanctuary. The acoustics were so perfect you could hear his heavy breathing. "That useless old woman. She can't even control her own daughter anymore. She's weak, Bianca. She's past her expiration date." In the front row, Mother Regina froze completely. Her hand flew to her mouth, but the video wasn't finished destroying her. Marcus continued his rant, pacing back and forth in my ruined apartment like a caged animal. "As soon as we get the money," he growled viciously. "As soon as that check clears, I'm putting her in a nursing home, and not a nice one either. I found a place in Baytown, the cheapest one in the county. It smells like urine and rotting food. State-funded Medicare facility. Let her rot there with the other forgotten people. I'm not wasting a single dollar of my inheritance on her medical bills. She served her purpose. Now she's just dead weight, holding me back." The silence in Grace Chapel Baptist Church was absolutely profound. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of 600 hearts stopping simultaneously. On the screen, Bianca laughed a cold, cruel sound. "Just make sure they take Medicaid," she said casually. "We need that cash for the house in River Oaks. I'm not living in Memorial Park forever." I pressed the pause button deliberately. The image froze on Marcus's face, contorted in rage and greed, caught forever in his moment of pure evil. I looked down from the pulpit. Marcus was staring at the screen with his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. Bianca had gone completely pale, her hand gripping the pew so hard her knuckles were bone white. But I looked at Mother Regina. She wasn't moving at all. She was staring at the frozen image of her golden child, her precious son, the boy she had worshipped and protected and lied for her entire life. She had just heard him call her a useless old woman. She had just heard him plan to discard her like garbage in the worst nursing home he could find. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving her looking gray and ancient. The mask of the saintly mother cracked and fell away in pieces, leaving only a devastated woman who realized she had bet everything on the wrong horse. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the sanctuary. "You wanted to know about family values, Mother. You wanted the church to see how united we are. Well, here it is in high definition. This is what Marcus really thinks of you. This is the man you wanted me to bow down to. This is your legacy." Sister Patterson, in the third row, stood up slowly. She looked from the screen to Marcus and then to Mother Regina. She didn't spit this time. She just covered her mouth with her gloved hand and sat back down slowly, as if the weight of the truth was too heavy to stand under. The spell was broken. The truth was out, and I was just getting started with my presentation. I didn't give them any time to recover from the initial shock. The image of Marcus's twisted, hateful face faded from the screen, but I knew that image was burned permanently into every retina in the room. Mother Regina was still standing there, frozen like a pillar of salt, looking like Lot's wife after she turned back. She was trembling visibly. She reached out a desperate hand toward the congregation, perhaps to beg for sympathy, perhaps to claim the video was a deep fake. But I cut her off before she could speak. I clicked the remote again. "Now let's talk about the money," I said, my voice slicing through the stunned silence like a surgical blade. "You all know that for the past 3 years, this church has been trying desperately to raise funds for a new roof. You've given your tithes faithfully. You've given your offerings sacrificially. You've held bake sales and car washes and fundraising dinners. And yet every single month, the building fund somehow seems to be empty. Pastor Williams has told you it's inflation. He's told you construction costs are rising. He's told you the contractors keep changing their bids." The screen behind me flashed white. A massive spreadsheet appeared, magnified so that even the elderly members in the back row could read the numbers clearly. "This is the complete ledger for the building fund account," I explained, pointing to the screen. And these highlighted rows in red are unauthorized withdrawals made by the church treasurer. That would be you, Mother Regina. A collective gasp went through the room. It was sharp and sudden, like oxygen being sucked out. I clicked the button again. A new slide appeared showing a damning side-by-side comparison. On the left were the withdrawals from the church account with dates and amounts. On the right were deposits made into a private account on the exact same dates, with matching amounts. And where did that money actually go? I asked, stepping out from behind the pulpit to stand right at the edge of the stage. Did it go to a roofing contractor? Did it go to buy shingles, or lumber, or labor? No, absolutely not. I clicked the remote one final time. The screen showed the ultimate destination of every stolen dollar, a betting platform website known for illegal sports gambling. The account holder's name was listed clearly in bold black letters for everyone to see, Marcus Chen Brooks. The silence shattered into 1,000 pieces. A low rumble started in the back of the church. It was the sound of betrayal. It was the sound of people realizing their sacrifice had been turned into vice and addiction. You took the widow's mite, Mother, I said, my voice trembling with righteous anger. You took lunch money from the children's ministry. You took pension checks from the elderly who trusted you completely to manage the benevolence fund. And you didn't use it to do God's work. You used it to pay off Marcus's bookie. You stole from God himself to fund his gambling addiction. Someone in the middle row stood up. It was Deacon Jones, an elderly man who had donated his entire retirement bonus to the roof project. He pointed a shaking finger at the stage. Thief, he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion and betrayal. You are a thief, Regina Brooks. That one word opened the floodgates completely. The rumble turned into an angry roar. People were standing up now. They were shouting. They were waving their programs in the air. The respect they had held for the Brooks family for generations evaporated in seconds. They weren't looking at a saint anymore. They were looking at a common criminal. Mother Regina looked around wildly, desperately. Her eyes darted from face to face, looking for an ally, looking for anyone who would stand up for her. But there was no one. Even Pastor Williams had stepped back several feet, physically distancing himself from her as if she were radioactive. She looked at Marcus for support, but he was slumped in the pew with his head in his hands, trying to make himself invisible. You lied to us. A woman screamed from the balcony. You told us the bank froze the funds. You're nothing but a liar and a thief. I stood there calmly and let the waves of anger wash over the stage. I didn't need to say another word. The evidence was 50 feet high and glowing behind me in undeniable clarity. They had come to watch me be humbled and broken. Instead, they were watching their own idols crumble to dust before their eyes. The booing grew louder, a cacophony of hurt and rage that literally shook the foundations of the building. Mother Regina took a step back, her heel catching on the carpet, and she stumbled badly, clutching the podium desperately for support, but not a single person moved to help her. She was alone on that stage, surrounded by the truth she had tried so desperately to bury. But I still wasn't finished. There was one more revelation that would destroy them completely. The noise in the sanctuary was absolutely deafening. It was a physical weight pressing down on the altar. Mother Regina stood at the center of the chaos, looking small and withered and defeated. She gripped the edge of the pulpit, her knuckles white as bone. She tried desperately to speak, to formulate some lie that could salvage the wreckage. But her mouth just opened and closed silently, like a dying fish. For years, she had used fainting spells strategically as a weapon. She would swoon gracefully whenever she needed sympathy or wanted to change an uncomfortable subject, but this was different. I saw the light go out behind her eyes. Her knees buckled. It wasn't a graceful slide. It was a complete collapse. She hit the carpet with a heavy, sickening thud that vibrated through the floorboards. A gasp sucked all the air out of the room. But for the first time in 40 years, nobody immediately moved to help her. They were too paralyzed by what they'd witnessed. Then the screaming started. But it didn't come from the congregation. It came from the front row. Bianca had been staring at the screen, processing the horrible fact that the millions she thought she had married into were actually hundreds of thousands in crushing debt. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. The G-Wagon she had ordered. The house in River Oaks she had bragged about to her family. The pearls around her neck. It was all a mirage built on stolen church funds and lies. She turned to Marcus. Her face wasn't the face of a loving wife. It was the face of a woman who had been completely conned. You lied to me, she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. You told me you had it all handled. You told me we were going to be rich. You told me your family had money. Marcus tried to reach for her with trembling hands. Baby, listen to me, he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. I can fix this. Just calm down, please. Bianca did not calm down. She lunged at him. She swung her heavy designer purse and it connected with the side of Marcus's head with a solid crack that echoed. He stumbled backward, falling over the communion rail, crashing into the table where the transfer papers were arranged. Bianca was on him instantly like a wild animal. She was clawing at his face, tearing at his expensive suit. The string of pearls around her neck broke, sending white beads bouncing across the sanctuary floor like marbles. You ruined me, she screamed, striking him again and again. You dragged my name through the mud for nothing. You're a loser, Marcus. A broke, pathetic, gambling addict. Loser. Marcus curled into a defensive ball, trying to shield his face from her manicured nails. Get her off me, he yelled, his voice muffled and terrified. Somebody help me. The church had turned into a wrestling ring. The choir members were standing on the pews to get a better view. Sister Patterson was shouting for Jesus to send fire. Pastor Williams finally snapped out of his shock paralysis. He grabbed the microphone, his face purple with rage. Order, he bellowed, his voice booming over Bianca's shrieks. We will have order in the house of the Lord. Security, get them out of here. This is a sanctuary, not a street corner. 4 large men in black suits, the church security team, rushed down the aisle. 2 of them grabbed Bianca, pulling her off Marcus. She was kicking and spitting, her hair wild, her makeup smeared. The other 2 hauled Marcus to his feet. His lip was bleeding, and his suit jacket was torn completely in half, exposing his sweat-stained shirt. He looked at me with pleading eyes, begging for help, but I just stood there at the pulpit, watching the chaos consume them completely. They were being dragged out of the church they thought they owned. Mother Regina lay unconscious on the floor. Her children were tearing each other apart physically. It was a tragedy of absolutely biblical proportions, and I was the only one, standing still in the center of the storm. But then something happened that I hadn't predicted. The security guards were hauling Marcus toward the heavy oak doors. He was kicking and thrashing like a trapped animal. His suit was ruined. His reputation was incinerated. But greed is a drug more powerful than any narcotic. It blinds you to reality, even when you're staring directly into the abyss. Just as they reached the threshold, Marcus planted his feet firmly. He broke free from the grip of the deacon on his left. He spun around, wild-eyed and desperate, looking back at the altar where I stood. He looked at the unconscious body of our mother. Then he looked at me with a hatred that burned hotter than hellfire. You think you won? He screamed, his voice tearing through his throat. You think exposing me changes anything at all? I'm still the heir. The will is clear. That warehouse is mine, Maya. You can keep your precious church money. You can keep whatever cash grandfather had. But the land is mine. It's prime real estate. I'll sell it tomorrow, and I'll be richer than you ever dreamed. You can't touch the land. It's mine by birthright. The church went quiet again. It was the silence of confusion. People looked at me, wondering if he was right, wondering if the villain still had an ace up his sleeve. I saw doubt creeping into the faces of the elders. If Marcus still held the deed to a multi-million-dollar property, he still had power, and in this world, power often buys forgiveness. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. From the shadows of the choir stand, a rhythmic squeaking sound emerged. Mr. Wellington rolled his wheelchair forward slowly and deliberately. He stopped next to me at the pulpit. He didn't look at the congregation. He looked directly at Marcus with eyes like steel. He reached out a trembling hand and adjusted the microphone. The feedback whined for a second before his deep, gravelly voice filled the room. You're a fool, Marcus, Wellington said. His voice wasn't loud like Marcus's, but it had the weight of mountains. You spent so much time counting your chickens that you forgot to check if you actually own the coop. I'm talking about the warehouse on Lockwood. Marcus yelled back, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. It's in the deed. It's my inheritance. It's nobody's inheritance, Wellington replied calmly. He pulled a folded document from his breast pocket. It was old and yellowed. Solomon was a brilliant man. He knew how to make $1 out of 15 cents. But back in 1968, a black man couldn't just buy prime industrial land in the city. They wouldn't sell it to us. So he did the next best thing. He signed a ground lease with the railroad company. Wellington paused, letting the words sink in. He opened the document carefully. A 99-year ground lease, he read aloud. With a termination clause for public infrastructure development. I watched the realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. He did the math in his head. His eyes went wide. His mouth fell open. That lease expired, Wellington said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow echoed like a gavel striking. And 8 months ago, the city invoked the infrastructure clause for the light rail expansion. The property has already reverted to the Metropolitan Transit Authority. The land doesn't belong to the estate. The warehouse doesn't belong to you. It's scheduled for demolition in 6 weeks. It's over, Marcus. You're fighting over dust and demolition debris. Marcus's legs gave out. This time, nobody had to drag him. He slumped against the doorframe, sliding down until he hit the floor. He looked at his hands empty. He had destroyed his family, betrayed his sister, and committed multiple felonies for a fortune that had evaporated into thin air. He had leveraged his entire life against a ghost. The security guards looked at Pastor Williams. The pastor nodded grimly. They picked Marcus up by his armpits. He didn't fight them this time. He was a hollow shell. As they dragged him out into the harsh sunlight, I heard him laughing. It was a high, broken sound, the sound of a man who had lost his mind along with his soul. The doors slammed shut. The echo rang through the church, marking the end of the Brooks dynasty. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one final piece of evidence to present. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, sealing out Marcus's broken laughter. The church was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now, the hush of a crowd that had witnessed a magic trick revealed and was waiting breathlessly for the final bow. Mr. Wellington sat next to me at the pulpit. He looked exhausted, but triumphant. He smoothed the blanket over his knees and looked out at the people who had judged me so harshly just 20 minutes ago. You all thought Solomon was just a mechanic, he said, his soft voice somehow carrying to every corner. You thought he fixed cars and hoarded scrap metal. You saw the grease under his fingernails and you assumed his mind was just as dirty. But Solomon Brooks was a visionary. He saw things other people completely missed. Wellington reached into his inside jacket pocket again. He pulled out a blue envelope this time. It looked crisp and new, unlike the yellowed lease. Thank you for being here and letting me share my story. If it touched you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment telling me what city and state you're watching from. I love knowing where you all are. If you want to support me even more, there's a donation link in the description. I share real-life stories like this every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular videos will appear on your screen. Choose whichever one calls to you. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over just because someone tried to write the ending without you.